Hello students. So in the previous session we have discussed the first paragraph of the chapter Silver Lining, where it is said that human emotions cannot be calculated. We cannot judge someone's emotions from his or her face. And also our life is uncertain, it is not sure, and we never know what life brings to us. So whenever we get a moment full of peace, we should live it to the fullest. We should value it. Now, I recently had the very pleasant experience of staying at a guest house in one of the hill resorts. A friend of mine had earlier warmly recommended the place to me, claiming for it all the facilities which most of these boarding houses advertise but generally lack. It was, generally lack. So, let's see. The narrator here, who is telling us the story, is Mr. Dhanda. Here I is the narrator, Mr. Dhanda. So he is telling us the story, and now he tells us that he was very happy to stay at a guest house in a resort, and the resort was located in a hill. The narrator, Mr. Dhanda, tells us that before coming to the resort, one of his friends suggested him to stay there, saying that the resort is a very good one, and the narrator finally finds out that the resort is actually a good one. It was not like the other hotels and resorts which keep advertising themselves and claims that they are the best ones, but generally what happens? Generally we finally get to see that they are not as good as they claim themselves to be. Sometimes we find that they do not have all the facilities also. But here the narrator says that this resort which the narrator Mr. Dhanda is talking about and which his friend recommended him had all the facilities in it. So it was not like the other resorts which prefer to advertise themselves more, but actually they lack a good service. It is this resort which he is staying in is not like the other resorts and other hotels. And the narrator Mr. Dhanda is very much satisfied with the resort he was staying in. So now it was centrally situated, close to the post office, close to the market, close to the bus stand. So here the narrator keeps on praising the resort. He lays emphasis, and he says that it was centrally situated. Means it was close to the post office, close to the market, close to the bus stand. That means the resort was close to the post office, market and bus stand, and one can get all their essentials and their daily needs without going far away from the resort. People need not go so far to get their things. The market was close to the resort, the post office was also there, the bus stand too was close to the resort. So that is why the resort is said to be centrally situated. So people do not face any difficulty while staying in the resort, as it had all the facilities in it, and it had all the facilities nearby bus stand, and was yet isolated and away from the common din. There were pleasant views to be had from there. It had excellent cuisine, and I was well looked after by one of the most charming hostesses one could find anywhere. So here it is said that even if the resort had the market, the post office and the bus stand close to it and very nearby, the resort still was isolated from the common din. The resort was still isolated and away from the common din. That means the resort was still far away from all the hustle bustle and all the city noise and crowds, and that means the resort was peaceful. One can stay peacefully there, far away from the hustle bustle of the city. Now the narrator praises the resort. He says that there were pleasant views to be had from there. Means the narrator says that one can have pleasant views from the resort. Then it had excellent cuisine, cuisine means the food. So the resort provided excellent food, and they looked after the guests very well. Means the owners and the working staff of the hotel looked after the guest very well. So that's how the narrator praises the hotel or the resort. It was a guest house where he was staying in. So he praises the resort in this way. So now I discovered that the place exactly corresponded to the details described, but it was the hostess particularly and her husband and their little daughter who really proved to be the center of attraction to me. So the narrator says that he discovered the place as exact as the details provided. He found the place exactly the same as the details given by the resort. Moreover, he says that keeping apart all the other things of the resort and keeping apart all the other services and location of the resort, what attracted the narrator the most? It was the people over here who took care or looked after the guest, who are the owners of the resort. Okay, so he was amazed and attracted by the owners of the resort. It was the hostess, her husband, and their little daughter. Means they were Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari and their little daughter Pramodini. Now, the lady belonged to the south. Though she had married a North Indian, she was rather dark but had a very pleasant face, all smiles and kindness. So here the narrator is describing the owners of the resort, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari. And first of all, he talks about the lady, means Mrs. Bhandari. She belonged to South. That means she was a South Indian and she was married to Mr. Bhandari, who was North Indian. Okay, so the narrator describes her complexion first and says that she was rather dark. As Mrs. Bhandari belonged to South, she was a South Indian, so it is obvious that being from South, her complexion or her skin color must be dark. But the narrator also says that her face was very pleasant and she kept smiling all the day and she was a very kind lady. That's what the narrator says about the lady of the landlady of the resort, who is Mrs. Bhandari. Now, the husband was a huge, swarthy man with large bony limbs. He was extremely well-mannered, and there was not a trace of that untempered roughness which one finds in most men hailing from the north. So here the narrator describes the husband, that is Mr. Bhandari. The narrator says that Mr. Bhandari was a huge, swarthy man, means he was a very tall man and he had bony limbs. That means he was very thin and tall. And moreover, Mr. Bhandari was a very good and well-mannered person, the narrator says. And people usually believe that people from North or the North Indian people gets angry too soon, or they cannot handle their temper. But in case of Mr. Bhandari, it was not like that. Even though he belonged to North and he was a North Indian, he was instead a very, very calm kind of a person. So that's what the narrator says about Mr. Bhandari, the owner of the resort. Now, Mrs. Bhandari, the landlady, took me in hand the moment I arrived. She looked after my luggage, gave instructions regarding my room, had a cup of delicious coffee produced in no time, and then put me at my ease by talking to me informally about myself and my visit. So, the narrator says that Mrs. Bhandari, the landlady, took me in hand the moment I arrived. Here, the meaning of took me in hand. The meaning of took me in hand means is that Mrs. Bhandari handled the guest, who is the narrator, Mr. Dhanda. as the narrator reached the resort. So, as the narrator reached the resort, Mrs. Bhandari was the first one who talked to him. She talked to him, she also took care of his luggage, she also handed him over the keys of the room and gave all the details of his room. She also gave a delicious cup of coffee to the guest, means the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, and then she talked to him in a very friendly manner about himself, about his travel, and about his visit, and because of which the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, felt very much comfortable talking to her, means Mrs. Bhandari. I was completely won over by the family. It appeared as if I had known them for years. So, the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, now says that he did not feel that he was a new guest to that place. He was new to that place. He did not feel like that. He felt like he knew these people for years long. And so the narrator was completely satisfied and was comfortable talking to the family, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, who are the owners of the resort. So he was, the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, was very much satisfied with the resort as well as the owners of the resort, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari. So we will stop here. We will continue from the next session.